Hi, everybody. Welcome to Big Easiest Ways to Wellness. I'm your host, Holly MacKenna, integrative psychiatrist, and I have a familiar face with us today, Danielle Paciera, who is the amazing, fabulous, integrative nutritionist, dietitian, brilliant in all the things,
Very
and just super smart and lovely and amazing. And I asked her to come on today because, I've had a lot of folks talk to me or bring up to me their frustration with gaining what I call like the COVID-20 during this COVID-19 pandemic. Suddenly finding that maybe their middles are getting a little rounder, things are getting soft. Initially we weren't allowed to be outside and everyone was isolating, so that was understandable. We all kind of went into that, getting all the snacks like you would during hurricane season, and then eating all the snacks, and then the stress eating, and then all the things that come with that. So, now folks are starting to think, it's been 6 months, maybe I need to do something about this. And so I thought bringing on an expert who can tell us how to do this in a way that's not so unhealthy and maybe not so fad driven would be a good way to go. So welcome, Danielle. How are you?
I'm good. I have been eating some of my COVID chocolate today.
I mean, let's be real, right? Like, I have definitely done some of the things that I tell my folks not to do. I'm not necessarily perfect. I like to try to be, and maybe to my children I am at times, but reality sets in. And we just had this hurricane scare, our second one. Who knows what in like third and fourth or whatever comes on. It is 2020 after all. And so we all go into that mode when we're kind of shutting everything in, especially if it's a category 1 or 2, and like staying at home and like getting all the snacks, and and then adding the fact that we've been in this pandemic for so long. It's real easy to kind of go into that stress mode and doing behaviors that we kind of excuse because it's in the non-2020 time, like, this is just temporary. This is just the weekend, if I cheat. Or
I think there's been a total dichotomy. Some people are just numbing out, and some people are taking advantage, or at least were in the beginning taking advantage of being home more, not having the commute, doing more outside stuff. And then we hit the peak of the summer, and there's a handful of folks who don't like to go outside when it's hot and humid.
Hey, I got my Irish background. I get very sweaty when it's very humid.
Mm-hmm.
I've been loving this weather the last few days, but before that, you couldn't even go outside. The low is 80 at night. I mean, that's crazy. I know I live on a swamp, but come on. That makes it hard. So when I have folks come to me, they talk to me about, doc, I am really not happy with how I'm looking. There's, I see these things on, about keto or about fasting, or, what's a good place for someone to start if they are just realizing that maybe they haven't been following the healthiest habits and now they want to kind of turn things around? Like, I mean, if just saying it feels overwhelming.
The first place to start is paying attention. Paying attention to what you're doing, when you're doing it, paying attention to what you're eating. For a lot of people, it's there's been some emotional eating for sure, but it's also the fact that there's so much food available when they're working from home. It's proximity eating, and a lot of that tends to be mindless eating. So I think really paying attention. And the next thing is not paying attention to a lot of the fad stuff. Cookie cutter diets don't work.
Right.
Every person is very biochemically unique. We all have different genetics, different backgrounds, different microbiomes. So one approach may help one person, but it's not going to help everybody. There are a number, people have been asking me, friends, clients, family, all of it, have been asking me about keto too. Not as much the intermittent fasting lately, but that has come up in the past. But right now it's keto everywhere. And there are a number of patients who in the past I've put on keto. You know, there's some benefits in terms of appetite regulation, some brain chemistry, mood-related benefits, but at the same time, it's horrible for the microbiome. It's
Right.
horrible for the gut in many cases. And if you mess up the microbiome, then you can extract more calories from food. You can be more in an inflammatory state, and that just sets you up to gain more weight when you stop, or even not when you stop, but more weight a little bit further down the road.
So when we talk about microbiome, do you have like a kind of simple way that you explain that to folks when you're seeing them?
Yeah, there's a lot of good guys and bad guys in the gut.
Okay.
Some of those are bacteria, some of them are virus, some of them are, it's not going to sound good, but fungal. You always have things like E. coli and Salmonella and Candida in your gut. They're there all the time. It's when there's an imbalance in the gut that those become problematic. So what the microbiome is it's thousands, trillions, billions, what have you. You know, the numbers go, the literature goes back and forth of
Right.
microbes that are on and in your body. The vast majority of them tend to be housed in the gut. And they do a lot of good things for us. They help us make vitamins, make minerals. They tell our genes what to do. They make the foods we eat healthy. I mentioned chocolate earlier. One of the reasons chocolate is as good for us as it is when it's dark chocolate, not loaded with sugar, is because of the metabolites produced by the microbiome when they eat the chocolate that we eat. You know, oftentimes we think we're feeding us, but what we're doing is feeding our microbiome.
I mean, they're just having a party down there. We just want it to be the right party and not like have all these party crashers.
No party crashers, not allowed. We don't want the freeloaders. So what the microbiome does too is tells the immune system what to do, which is very important during COVID. I have a fondness for PubMed and research, and I have an article sitting, waiting to be read about how altered microbiomes are increasing the risk of COVID complications. And I can't think of the word I want, but the intensity of COVID infections, the severity of the infection, and also the likelihood that a person will not just test positive, but actually become infected and sick. Mm-hmm. They also regulate inflammation, regulate insulin resistance, glucose control. You know, those things are very tied to weight, very much so, and appetite.
Yeah, for sure. I've had folks talk to me about, you know, being put on an antibiotic and then wondering like, you know, what's this thing about like using yogurt or using probiotics? Like, what's that about? Because I'm taking an antibiotic that's killing bacteria. Why would I want to take bacteria? Like, you know, there's a lot of confusion as far as like what the positives and negatives are as far as probiotics and what have you. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I've always been into the gut and the microbiome, so I'm always going to lean towards probiotics are good. But there, you know, I think I may have mentioned it when we sat down before. There's a difference between your diet, what your diet provides in a normal setting, and when you have a therapeutic need. So when you do something like destroy the microbiome in your gut by an antibiotic, that creates a therapeutic need.
Okay.
If you have gut nourishing foods, yes, you can rebuild some of that, but you're not always going to be able to restore. Some of that has to do with were you breastfed? Were you birthed vaginally? Did you have a microbiome loving, nourishing diet throughout your life? Were you free from steroids, antibiotics, hormones for the vast majority of your life? Have you moderated your stress well? You know, those things can all alter the microbiome. If you have a resilient microbiome, diet may be enough, but I'll tell you, there's not a lot of people that I've seen that do. So probiotics are a good thing for most people. And there are some probiotics that tend to be better suited for antibiotic-related issues. There are some that tend to be better related to, let's say, inflammatory issues, some that are related to weight regulation. So it really makes sense to not just go to the store and buy a probiotic. What we know is a lot of what's on consumer shelves is not going to be very high quality anyway. It's not going to have what it says it does oftentimes.
Mm-hmm.
But going to someone who can tell you, or at least knowing what to look for in the literature in terms of what microbe do I take after antibiotics. You know, a big one is Saccharomyces boulardii, but there are others. So yogurt, kefir, kombucha, sauerkraut, kvass, those things are wonderful. I do say include them in your diet, especially when you've had a microbiome insult, but don't rely on them solely. And they're not going to do anything if you don't have the foods that feed the good guys. That's almost more important than taking probiotics, is eating prebiotic rich foods, eating fibers. And those fibers, yes, you can take supplements for those, but it's not going to be the same as getting it from the diet. And that's one of the reasons keto has been showing up as having such a negative impact on the microbiome. You can do the keto diet very healthfully, and that would be maybe higher healthy fats with lots of gut nourishing plant foods, not necessarily the ones that are higher in carbs, obviously. Or you can do it unhealthfully and rely on exogenous ketones or ketone supplements. A lot of the packaged keto foods, lots of bacon, lots of eggs, lots of meat, lots of oil. You know, that stuff is not going to be good for the microbiome. And again, that's going to set a person up for weight gain further down the road. And part of the reason for that is not just the effect that has on inflammation, but it's because when you're not getting enough of those fibers, food doesn't move through very well. So that gives the not so great microbes more time to extract calories from food and then to feed them to you. So if you have an unhealthy microbiome or slow transit, you can actually get more calories from the food you're eating, and that sets you up for weight gain.
Oh, that's really interesting. I think also with the amount of stress that we've had, I mean, now we're going on 6 months of chronic stress, which, you know, I've talked about before, changing your brain chemistry and also like what your brain actually looks like if we looked at it. I'm sure that's also changing what's happening in our gut, right? As far as like having that much stress, there's so much connection between
and that can change minute to minute.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, there's the gut-brain axis. That's a nerve that runs from your brain pretty much through your whole body, but it runs through and innervates and tells the gastrointestinal system what to do. So the brain and the gut are always talking, and the gut talks back to the brain. What we see is with the microbes, they can actually restore balance to that gut-brain axis. A lot of them do produce neurotransmitters like serotonin and GABA that tend to be calming and those anti-anxiety related neurotransmitters. So there's a lot of places that the microbiome plays into the brain chemistry too. And then of course, I'm sure you've talked about this at some point, there's the whole view of depression not necessarily being just a genetic or a situational, etc. Problem or having those kinds of origins, but also being an inflammatory disorder.
Right, right. So that's where we get into that, and we've used the word already several times, like the anti-inflammatory diet, which I think for folks who aren't familiar with it, like I often get a glazed look over their eyes, or if I talk about eating more plants, New Orleans folks like start running for the hills. When you just mentioned like bacon, I could hear the screams through the internet as people said, "Don't take my bacon." So if you would maybe talk a little bit about what the anti-inflammatory diet is and like what we mean when we're talking about that.
That I can definitely do, but you have to promise me we're going to come back to this idea that I take people's favorite foods away.
Absolutely.
That keeps a lot of people from coming to see me and getting the help that they need, and it's the furthest thing from the truth.
Girl, I want to put on the same girl meme right here. Same. I hear you.
Yes, for sure. So the anti-inflammatory diet is basically a diet that is going to be feeding your body all of these wonderful compounds that speak to the cells, speak to the genes, tell them what to do in a positive way. A lot of us are doing a lot of anti-inflammatory eating, or at least were, many of us still, without even knowing it. So if we think about the foods that are pro-inflammatory, it helps to talk about the anti-inflammatory foods after that. The pro-inflammatory foods are the foods that create problems. What are those? Processed foods, packaged foods, boxed foods. Ideally, your food should be from a farmer, not a factory. Factory foods are pro-inflammatory. That's because they contain non-food related items. The body's not meant to deal with those things. If you pick up a package and you're reading the ingredient list and you don't know what the majority of the things listed on that list are, it's probably pro-inflammatory. And if you don't walk down the street and pick up random things and put them in your mouth and eat them, why would you do it with food?
True.
So other things that tend to be pro-inflammatory are processed meats. I like bacon. There are some bacons that are, I can't believe I just admitted that because I was a vegetarian for a long time. There are some people who know me that don't know I like bacon now. I don't eat it very often, but when I do, it's from a good source. Mm-hmm. So animals can be pro-inflammatory or anti-inflammatory for our bodies. If it's grass-fed, if more from a cow, we're not going to see the inflammatory potential that we do when cows are being fed grains. They're not made to eat grains. When they do, creates a lot of inflammation in their bodies. When we're eating conventional chickens that are shoved in these little bitty cages and not fed good diets, not exposed to any air, they're going to be very pro-inflammatory. There's actually a big body who argues that one of the most inflammatory foods in the American diet is chicken. Other things, though, that affect the inflammatory aspects of meat are the additives, nitrates, nitrites, sulfites, things like that. So you can have some of these cured meats, the antipasti. You can have some of these things like bacon and sausage, but try to get them from a better animal. Try to get the ones that are not mass produced. Try to get the ones that don't have all of the additives. And you'll be better off when you do eat them, and then don't make them the staples. Those are pleasure foods. Pleasure foods we don't need to eat a ton of.
Yeah, it makes sense to me just intuitively that if you're eating an animal product and the animal is less stressed, that you're just going to have less stress go to you. That's, the basis of a lot of spiritual thought, but also just biologically it makes sense as far as stress hormones. And like you said, the inflammation, having that is obviously going to change the meat product, as I like to call it to my husband when he's eating it, and make it into something that isn't going to be so great when it's hitting our GI system there.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that's very pro-inflammatory, well, two other things, certain oils, and I'll come back to that, but definitely processed carbs, sugar. What your food should look like is what you see when you go pick it from the ground or off of the tree or off of the bush, the vine, etc. The further from that you get, probably the worse it is for you. The more stripped it is, the more inflammatory it's going to be. So a lot of these things that we think are good for us because they might have wheat in the name aren't so great for us because does it look like a wheat plant? No. Whole grain bread Can you tell what plant it came from if you look at your piece of bread and you go look at a field? No, you can't. But do you get a better idea if you look at whole oats and an oat plant? Yeah, you do. Certainly, oranges versus orange juice. I would be one of the first people to tell you, and I'll tell you every time it comes up, juice is not a healthy thing. It's a bad for you food unless you're doing vegetable juices, fresh pressed, cold extracted juices, etc. And definitely not fruit-based juices, but vegetable-based juices. A lot of the processed carbs, the crackers, the cereals, hot, cold, etc., they tend to be further removed from that plant. So those tend to be a big source of inflammatory foods in our diet here in the Americas. For some people, other carbs can be, but I wouldn't make blanket statements. Now to the oils. At one time, canola oil was touted as being a very healthy oil because it had some ALA, which is one type of omega-3. But what we know is that really vegetable oils aren't so good for us. The oils that tend to be better for us are the monounsaturated oils, those that come from olives, olive oil, avocados, and then coconut oil isn't too bad either. That's a big one with the keto diet. Nut and seed oils tend to vary a little bit. The issue with some of those oils is that they have a low smoke point, and if they're used for cooking, you can create pro-inflammatory compounds. But the oils like vegetable oil, safflower, sunflower, soy is so heavily genetically modified, so is canola. Anytime you have anything genetically modified, it's going to be pro-inflammatory, you can pretty much bet. So a lot of those vegetable-based oils, plant-based oils that are not the ones that I listed as being good for you, tend to be pro-inflammatory. I talked a lot about the processed meats. Certain meats from conventional animals. The proteins that tend to be more anti-inflammatory would be fish and seafood. I mean, we are in this mecca of great seafood. A lot of the deep sea fish tend to be more anti-inflammatory, certainly the lower mercury ones, the ones that are wild versus farmed. But you do get some omega-3 benefits from our local seafood too. And even if you're not getting a ton of omega-3s, which are very anti-inflammatory, it's a good source of protein that's not pro-inflammatory.
See, I love that, especially right now. Like, what a great way to support the Gulf Coast and support our fishermen and our local folks who are struggling right now is like, go out and buy some Louisiana seafood. I love it.
Yeah, I was speaking with one of our farmers or one of our seafood purveyors at the market 2 weeks ago about how slow it is on some days and not other days, and how to get people coming back to the market to support her. It's definitely difficult right now for a lot of people, but there are ways to get the delicious seafood other than getting it from the grocery store. But if that's what you have to do, get the local seafood from the store. There are great places like Schaefer's. You can order ahead from the Crescent City Farmers Markets, the Covington Farmers Market, the Destrehan, the Ormond. Those all have seafood purveyors too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely ways, especially now with the pandemic. I feel like people have gotten even more creative with having things. When we went to lunch for our other time that we met for our little lagniappe, we saw one of the farmers markets had like a pickup point with pre-made boxes. My family actually orders from Imperfect Foods, which has a number of imperfect vegetables and excess items that are organic, so are much easier to get, and the price point is lower. There are a lot of different ways to venture out, and now especially, again, because we want to support our local economy, looking for ways like you're mentioning with the farmers markets. I think that's ideal. That would be, if I didn't already have it in place, if I was someone watching this and like trying to figure out like, what do I do? Start out with
some good
farmers markets and just go and get, like, maybe they have a box that they do every week or whenever you happen to go. I used to do this with the Holly Grove market. I would just get what was in the box and Google the vegetable and make something up.
Yeah, that's called a CSA. You know, a lot of people have this misconception that if you're eating more organic, more local, it's going to automatically be higher priced. But there are a lot of ways to do it that are not going to be outrageously priced. A lot of actually very cost-effective ways to do this. And there's always a secondary cost. You know, if you're getting cheap foods, it's going to come back to you, and it's not going to support our local economy, which is going to have an effect on you too. But when you support our local economy, when you get these fresher foods, you're saving in the long run your own time and money. You're not going to spend as much on getting well once you've gotten sick. You're not going to spend as much time trying to get well, going to see a doctor, going to get this procedure or that procedure, etc.
Right. So, I mean, think of all the medicines you don't have to buy if you start out with this anti-inflammatory way of eating and building your microbiome in a positive way. Like all the things you'll avoid, the diabetes, the hypertension, the heart disease, all the things.
Better brain chemistry, better appetite regulation. Right. And, you know, one of the things I didn't mention, and you brought it up, it's some of the most anti-inflammatory foods out there. The deficiency food tends to be, yes, but of course the plant foods, the really colorful plant-based foods, a lot of the dark green leafy vegetables, those are just stellar. You know, we have all these trendy superfoods that come and go, but one of the staples is and always will be dark green leafy vegetables. The cruciferous family, the broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, radish, turnip, arugula, watercress, they're all stars. Certainly anything that's really colorful, even a carrot, you know, they're common vegetables, but they're super colorful. A lot of superstars in terms of anti-inflammatory foods we don't think about, but we eat lots of them. Tomatoes, oranges even. We have great citrus in Louisiana. Berries, we have wonderful berries. I have never had blueberries as good from anywhere else as I have from here. Same with the strawberries. Our strawberries are better than any that I've had, even right off the farm when I picked them in South Carolina. Apples are a good source of a compound called quercetin. That not only can have some very potent anti-inflammatory benefits, but it also feeds the microbiome, as do the fiber in apples. So it's really easy to eat an anti-inflammatory diet. We tend to make things a lot more complicated than they have to be. You know, if you think about basic concepts, protein and produce, eat a rainbow, make a farmer your food provider, not a factory. Eat real, fresh, whole, vital foods, not dead, devitalized foods.
And really, when it comes down to it, doing that is going to, as you've said and alluded to, it's going to feed your microbiome in a positive way, help build those positive microbes. And that in turn actually helps you with your weight balance and with, you know, what people see on the outside, because you're going to feel better on the inside. You're going to have more energy. It's going to be easier to go get up and walk in the morning during that circadian light. So you're lowering your stress, you're sleeping better later. All these things, you know, they're all connected. You know, that's part of why we both do integrative medicine and provide integrative type of services, is because everything is connected. You can't just do one thing and then that's the answer.
Yeah, the toenail's connected to the toe bone, the toe bone's connected to the gut, that's connected to the brain. You know, yeah. Everything works together. Everything is connected. When we tend to piece things apart, we're not going to be heading in the right direction.
Absolutely. So if I'm just going to think of one of my typical folks that I've seen that, you know, may think, oh, dietitian, like someone, you know, Louisiana guy, grew up here, likes to eat the gumbo, likes to, you know, watch the Saints games, do all the things that come with watching the games. If that's someone that's coming to see you, you mentioned like not taking things away. What do you usually start with someone who maybe has your typical like Louisiana American, maybe a little more inflammatory than we would like diet? Like, how does that person even start?
Well, again, they need to start by paying attention to the way foods make them feel, because probably what they're eating doesn't make them feel very good.
That's a great
But a
point.
big thing is not focusing on everything you're taking away, everything that you're avoiding. That is just like the kiss of death right there, the way to failure. The best way to be successful at improving things, and it doesn't need to improve yesterday. Every little step is going to lead you in the right direction. So take baby steps that are going to add to grand staircases. Focus on what you are doing, not what you're not doing. Focus on what you're going to put in, not what you're going to avoid. Be careful with the all or nothing. You know, that for a lot of New Orleanians is a downfall. Like, oh, it's Mardi Gras, I'm not going to pay attention. I'm just going to have fried chicken every day and drink and have tea every day. You can balance it. You know, you can have your piece of king cake and you can still eat healthfully the rest of the time. It doesn't have to be a huge king cake. You know, there are plenty of studies that show it's not how much you eat that gives you pleasure. It's what you eat. So what people ask me about cheese, I can eat cheese? Well, depending on the person, some people, yes, but don't go get the low fat cheese or the just organic cheese. Go get, even if it's not labeled organic, that triple cream French stinky cheese, if that's what you love. Go get the Greek feta packed in water that's made from sheep or sheep and goat versus the cheaper feta that you can measure or whatever. That's just random, just everyday feta. The other one's going to taste better. And when you have something that tastes better, you don't need as much of it because you get a lot more pleasure. So that's another thing, you know, really relish the food you're eating if you like it. But at the same time, relish it and know how it makes you feel. Because some of the things you thought you loved, you might find when you sit down and you eat it mindfully, doesn't taste as good as you thought it did. I used to love mango freeze. Loved it. Loved mango sorbet. And then one day I ate the mango freeze at Jazz Fest very mindfully, and I realized it doesn't taste as good as a mango, and it doesn't really taste as much like a mango as one might think. And it was kind of overly sweet for me. And I like candy. I'll be the first to admit it. So if something's too sweet for me, that can say a lot sometimes. And, you know, I've had people who love their burgers, and when they sat down and ate it mindfully, they realized that their favorite burger from Five Guys or something wasn't as good as they thought it was, but they still love their burgers that they make.
No, it's true. Yeah. And it doesn't, you know, when we say eating mindfully, it doesn't have to be, you know, that might sound kind of scary, but it's really just a matter of like just eating when you eat and paying attention to what happens when you take that bite and the tastes. And it actually is a much more pleasant experience. And I found you tend to eat less when you do that because you're also paying attention to when you start feeling full.
Yeah, and that can actually affect your stress. You know, if we're doing a million other things, and I'm guilty of this, if we're doing a million other things when we're eating, we're not going to get into the rest and digest state, the parasympathetic state. We're going to stay in that fight and flight response. And when you're in that fight and flight response, those stress hormones that you're pumping out tend to have an inflammatory effect on the gut. And they tend to also have a dwindling effect on the microbiome. So not only do you enjoy your food more if you pay attention to it when you're eating it, which is what in part eating mindfully is, but you tend to regulate your weight better for multiple different reasons. Mindful eating isn't just paying attention to what you're eating when you're eating it, though. It's paying attention to the environment and knowing how the environment affects your eating. You know, if you have a bigger bowl, a bigger plate, a bigger glass, a bigger fork, a bigger spoon, you're going to consume more. Maybe not the fork, but the spoon for sure. If you have a whole buffet in front of you, you're going to consume more than if you serve yourself, sit down and eat it. If you have a lot of people eating with you and a lot of different varieties of foods, Thanksgiving, you're going to eat more. If you stand next to a table at a party, you're going to eat more, as opposed to if you serve yourself and go stand in the corner, or not in the corner, but off to the side.
In the corner by
yourself. The other thing is knowing how your internal environment affects your eating. Yeah, a lot of us want to reach for food when we're stressed, because we know inherently that food brings us pleasure. Food brings pleasure, and it should. It's not something we choose. We don't go to a pleasure food when we're an infant and say, I'm going to bring pleasure from eating this. No, or I'm going to attain pleasure from eating this. The first time we consume anything, we're often put to the breast even before breast milk comes out. That's a bonding experience. I mean, just think about it. We've been ripped out of this comfortable, warm, secluded place into this place where people are touching us. It's loud, it's bright, it's cold. And then what happens? We're put back into this environment that's somewhat similar. So that first feeding initiates pleasure. And it's something, think about it. What do we do for birthdays? Cake, gathering, etc. What do we share when we celebrate? That's pleasure. We share food when we're celebrating. Celebrations are all about pleasure. So you should get pleasure from food. And that's why you can't take away those pleasure foods, but eating them mindfully is super important. Sorry, I went off on a tangent.
No, it's great, because I'm just thinking, especially here in Louisiana on the Gulf Coast, like food is such a part of our culture and of our being, and like what makes us whole. I mean, I had Chef Amy on previously talking about providing food to folks who were affected by Hurricane Laura, and that's part of what she was talking about is like that service and having that experience and making it an experience as a way to help someone and really kind of put yourself in that caregiver role. So yeah, we all relate to that for sure. But there's a way to still have the caregiving and maybe add some more vegetables.
Yeah.
Air fryer.
A lot of it comes to gatekeeping. Be a good gatekeeper. Bring lots of things in to your house that are going to feed the microbiome, that are going to support a more stable appetite, a more stable mood. There are foods that can increase your stress levels, and there are foods that can decrease your stress levels. There are foods that can leave you hungrier and wanting to eat more, and there are going to be foods that satisfy you and leave you with a more stable appetite throughout the rest of the day. There are going to be foods that make you crash energetically, and there are going to be foods that make you feel vibrant and energetic and clear-headed. So when we talk about mindful eating, it's starting to pay attention to what foods do what foods make you feel more vibrant, what foods don't. But being aware that there are going to be foods that you should enjoy that don't make you feel so great, and that's okay. But
yeah, kind of know that going in.
Right? All the time. You're going to eat them regardless. Don't have lots of them in the house. What you want to bring in your house are the foods that are going to feed you, make you feel good, and then you allow the other things in smaller portions. Typically going out for those tends to help with portion control. And then, oftentimes, not necessarily now, that's definitely a challenge now, but oftentimes when we go out, it's a pleasure thing. We go out with other people, we enjoy company of other people. Plus, it's nice to not have to think about what to make or to go through having to make it and to go through cleaning up. Yeah, you know what? I can cook great meals, but sometimes it's nice to have somebody else cook it for me.
Indeed, right? Okay, so if folks want to reach out, once they've mindfully looked at what they eat, they realize certain things are not agreeing with them, but they're not sure what the next step is. What's the best way for them to contact you?
They can visit my website is one way, or they can email me. It's my first name, Danielle, with a lowercase d, DANIELLE at 365vitality.com. That's probably one of the more effective ways, because oftentimes I'm talking to people and can't necessarily answer the phone. So I would say that tends to be a little bit more effective than the phone, but I can certainly be called at 504-264-2813. You can find a lot about the services on my website too, which is www.365vitality.com, just like the end of my email. Or you can contact me and I can tell you more about it. So if I summarize ways to eat to beat the COVID-19 in more ways than one, it would be really to nourish the body. Focus on eating a rainbow every time you eat. Focus on protein and produce and the really high quality proteins. Plant-based proteins are great too. focus more on eating more wholesome, eating less packaged, eating more fresh, vital foods, again, not those factory farm packaged processed foods. Making sure that you are getting some pleasure from food, making sure that you're eating in an environment that's conducive to you enjoying it and not being in that stress state. Making yourself a good gatekeeper, so filling your basket with a lot of those foods that are super colorful, a lot of those foods that are going to be energy-giving foods to you. And then allowing some of those things that might have some of those not so great oils or the sugar or the processed carbs, bacon, king cake, allowing those things in smaller portions.
Absolutely. All right. For more information, you guys can check out my website if you want to see more episodes. I also have like the Dirty Dozen and
I'm glad you said that. I totally forgot about pesticides. Thank you.
So check that out on my website. I have under resources, I have links to those information. Also information about our local seafood. And we talked about mercury, like what's safe, what's not. There's a link there. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe. And if you're watching us as a replay on Facebook, please hashtag replay and give us some hearts. And thanks to everyone for tuning in. Nicole asked us a question about using things for mental health. I think that'll be another episode that we'll have to talk about is eating for mental health and like some ideas with different oils and things like that. Mm-hmm. But thank you, everybody. And thank you so much, Danielle, as always.
Thank you. I always
so amazing. All right. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.